So, a statement from the eighth report of the confidential inquiries into maternal death in United Kingdom gives an idea of the substandard level of care that has caused many maternal death. Either too little or too late was a catchword there. Our own observations in the report of confidential review of maternal deaths in Kerala, for which many of the faculty are either contributors or editors, again specifies uh, the same thing. They have mentioned, all these reports have mentioned the speed with which a patient deteriorates, and irreversible shock occurs within no time. And by the time a patient is shifted to a higher center, irreversible damage would have already happened, and no matter whatever we do in a higher center, the patient could not be saved. Now, this is where every second matters. We have to identify the patient is deteriorating, and we have to do the right things at the right time. And it is here the role of anesthetist comes in. Unfortunately, many of our delivery points in our country does not have the luxury of a full-time anesthesiologist, where at the beck of a call, someone can come and take matters into their hand and stabilize the patient. So the purpose of my talk, as I understand, would be to give you general principles of management of a patient with ongoing bleeding, becoming unstable, deliberate on the guiding principles of management, so that the first responder in every hospital, which may be an obstetrician, which may be a staff nurse, which may be a resident, will be able to do the initial resuscitation methods and prevent the patient from deteriorating or prevent the patient from going into a point of no return. Now, as a few previous speakers, Nita Madam and all presented, the general principles of management um, needs an early intervention. And why do we need an early intervention? This is to prevent the lethal triad of hypothermia, acidosis, and coagulopathy from setting in. Once this is set in, it will become difficult for the patient to survive. Again, one point I want to insist here is monitoring. Monitor the vital signs continuously for all patients who are in your care, especially picking up vital signs early. That is, in from the chart adapted from Bonner, you can see a 10 to 15% of blood loss will show give palpitations, lightheadedness, headedness, and can show a mild increase in heart rate. Remember, at this point, blood pressure will be normal. So a mild increase in heart rate can be picked up only if the patient is being monitored continuously. When the loss becomes 25%, that is when the tachycardia moves to 100 to 120 beats per minute, the blood pressure becomes slightly low. That is when we all think there is something going wrong. When it reaches 45%, the blood loss, when it reaches 45%, the blood pressure dips to a systolic low of 50. That is when the patient collapses. So this is the point of no return. So an intervention at about 10 to 15% blood loss, or even 25% blood loss, could prevent a patient from going into a collapse. So this can be possible only if the vitals are monitored continuously. Now, shock index was again touched upon by Dr. Nida. This is shock index is a simple measurement of heart rate divided by systolic blood pressure. This is a vital tool in times of hemodynamic instability. This was initially developed for trauma, but Nathan et al. Have extrapolated this into obstetric postpartum hemorrhages. So, an shock index of 0.9 can be reassuring, but normally in a pregnant patient, SI will be normal at 1.1. So anything more than 1.7 should alert you that the patient is going bad. And when to suspect shock, you all know hypertension, tachycardia, oliguria, abnormal mental status, tachypnea, cold, clammy, and cyanotic skin. There will be metabolic acidosis and hyperlactatemia. Now I'll briefly brush upon the treatment goals. First and foremost, as in any unstable condition, remember the ABC. Maintain adequate tissue oxygenation. That is how you do it is by maintaining um, your airway and breathing. Second, restore or maintain adequate circulatory volume to prevent hypoperfusion of vital organs. Reverse or prevent coagulopathy and eliminate the obstetric cause of PPH. And if surgical intervention is planned, prepare for anesthesia. Again, how do you ensure adequate oxygenation? That is again by continuous monitoring. In setups where we can afford a multi-parameter monitor, saturation, heart rate, your respiratory rate, blood pressure, everything will be continuously monitored. There are standalone pulse oximeters where the plethysmogram, your heart rate and saturation can be monitored. Or if that also is not possible, these are COVID times, we know fingertip pulse oximeters are available for just about 1,000 rupees. That will be available in most of the centers. The crux is continuous monitoring. Pick up early that the patient early the signs of deterioration and act upon it. Now, escalation of oxygen therapy. At the first sign of a dip in saturation, start nasal cannula, oxygen delivery via nasal cannula. If it is not improving, start with face mask or Venturi mask. Here, I want to um, um, stress a point. I've seen face masks being put with about 1 to 2 liters of oxygen flow. Never put a face mask with flow rate of less than 5 liters at least, because any rate of flow less than 5 liters per minute will cause carbon dioxide retention, because the patient will rebreathe her own expired air if the flow rate is not adequate. Can be escalated to a non-rebreather mask or a high flow nasal cannula or a CPAP, or if it is still not possible for the patient to maintain saturation, it calls for an intubation of trachea and mechanical ventilation. Whatever method we do, ensure tissue oxygenation. Now, we have put an oxygen mask for the patient. The saturation picks up, but the patient is drowsy. Patient cannot sustain her airway, cannot sustain an open airway. Do the triple maneuver like head tilt, chin lift, and jaw thrust. You can use oral or nasal airways to keep the airway patent and ensure adequate oxygenation. Now we'll come to maintenance of adequate circulatory volume. The first and foremost thing here is early large bore venous access. Always remember, you have a venous cannula. Never think that this may be enough, because once a shock sets in, a cannulation will be difficult. I would suggest, when it is possible, put a central venous access at the earliest, because uh, once DIC sets in, central venous access may become a little difficult. Once shock set in again, it will become difficult. Central venous access has its own advantages. We can give rapid fluid infusions. You can measure CVP. So at the first instance, when it is possible, put a central venous access. Now, hypovolemic shock has to be treated aggressively with Paxils and other appropriate blood products. Now, transfusion should be kept with the blood loss, with an active management protocol for large blood volume transfusion. Many of the major hospitals, including Rajagiri, has a massive transfusion protocol. So it is good if every institution, if it is possible for them to develop their own protocols for massive transfusion. Large volumes of blood and blood products will be available at the activation of a code within minutes. That makes a lot of difference in management. And volume resuscitation, the target systolic pressure should be kept at 90 millimeter, and urine output has to be maintained at more than 30 ml per hour. This is how we ensure that perfusion is adequate. If blood is not available, we start with isotonic crystalloid fluid, but always remember more than 3 to 4 liters of crystalloid. You have to monitor hematocrit, coagulation status, core temperature, and electrolytes, because dilutional coagulopathy, electrolyte imbalance, and hypothermia is an added risk here. So, whenever possible, early recourse to blood and blood products, if the hemorrhage is heavy, should be the priority. And platelets and coagulation factors also should be rapidly corrected. Now, the question, what fluid? A balanced electrolyte crystalloid solution is always the best choice. Ringer lactate or plasmalite or many manufacturers have come out with balanced salt solutions nowadays. What happens if we give large number of normal saline? Um, we have already mentioned about the lethal triad of acidosis, high coagulopathy, because large volume of normal saline can lead to hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis, and this can add to the acidosis, which sets in which can alter the balance the patient is on. So, an approach that combines crystalloids and colloids may limit the total amount of administered fluid. And which colloid? We generally avoid a synthetic colloid. Albumin is a colloid solution of choice. Now, in a study published in New England Journal of Medicine that has come out in 2014, this clearly states the problem with hydroxyethyl starch in conditions of hypovolemia. There have been no significant change in 90-day mortality, but the patients who come out of the shock had significant requirement of renal replacement therapy. This is when intensive care specialists and anesthesiologists who cared for these patients world over had a relook on hydroxyethyl starch and other synthetic colloids. And it was categorically found that, it was found without doubt that synthetic colloids to an extent damages kidney when given in a state of shock. So, this is again another study from New European Society of Intensive Care Medicine, where the recommendation was to avoid HES solutions in patients with severe sepsis and septic shock. So this has been extrapolated to any conditions of shock treatment. So that brings us to a balancing act. What fluid? Ideally, based on your availability, a balanced crystalloid salt solution with albumin. But if albumin is not available, very small quantity of a colloid can also be given. But here again, I have to impress upon the importance of replacing blood with blood and blood products. So blood first priority, blood and blood products are first priority. If it is not available, a balanced crystalloid solution and very low volume of normal saline, and large volumes if it is required, balanced crystalloid solution, and albumin if available for volume replacement as a colloid. But if not available, try to reduce the quantity of synthetic colloids whenever possible. Then the role of tranexamic acid. It has been proved beyond doubt tranexamic acid makes a difference. 1 gram for an adult female who is pregnant, 1 gram over 20 minutes, that can be repeated in the next 3 hours. That has been different trials have proved. The women trial especially studied tranexamic acid effect in such conditions, and now it is proved beyond doubt that tranexamic acid is a drug that can make a difference. Use of vasopressors. There is a whole gamut of vasopressors available to treat this condition, but I would suggest As first responders, noradrenaline is the vasopressor of choice. We typically give it at a dose of 0.01 to zero point 0.3 microgram per kilogram per minute. And the EC dilution, uh, I would recommend for the first responder, 4 milligram is 1 ampule of 2 milliliter. 4 milligram should be diluted in normal saline or dextrose 5% to make it to 50 ml. So that will give you a concentration of 80 microgram per ml. Start at a rate of 5 ml per hour. You don't need to do any calculation here. Practically, just dilute it, start at 5 ml per hour, and increase it by 1 ml every 2 minutes, so as to keep systolic blood pressure more than 90 millimeter mercury at all times. Now, the other goal is to prevent or reverse the coagulopathy, which I think the next speaker, Dr. Mobin, will deal. And for intervention, prepare the operating room. So we have different techniques of anesthesia for that. I think discussion of that aspect in detail is beyond the scope of this. So I'll leave it at here. Thank you.